Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take the source material you provided and break it down into the core knowledge nuggets you need to be immediately and surprisingly well-informed.
Today we're doing something a little different. We're not just looking at a book about writing. We're almost performing an autopsy on a literary life.
That's a great way to put it. We're unpacking the curriculum vitae of a modern giant, a writer who starts his whole discussion on craft by telling you, and he's very blunt about this, that most books on writing are bullshit.
Yeah, that line just grabs you, doesn't it? Completely sets the tone.
It really does. So this whole deep dive is based on Stephen King's examination of his own life and craft. And it's not a rule book. He says it's an attempt to show how one writer was formed.
Exactly. And that formation, that's what we're dissecting. Our mission here isn't to, chase some kind of magical genius. King is very clear. There's no secret ingredient you can just go out and buy.
Right.
So instead, we're trying to extract the non-bullshit essentials, the ruthless professional discipline, and the core tools that are layered over a lifetime of really raw, unfiltered, and sometimes pretty traumatic experience.
Okay, so let's map this out. We're going to cover, well, everything. We'll look at how early poverty and instability kind of built his authenticity.
Why rejection slips belong on a spike.
Yes, and the power of having a single dedicated ideal reader. And then finally, this fascinating and, I think, central belief of his that writing is, at its core, an act of telepathy.
We're going to trace the whole path, from this chaotic childhood to professional maturity, and it all sort of culminates in this hard-won lesson that, life isn't a support system for art, it's the other way around.
It's a deep dive into how that messy, intense reality becomes the bedrock for disciplined, really captivating fiction. So let's jump right in with those early snapshots.
It really does sound like, talent might be part of the original package, but his early life, my goodness, it provided this bizarre, intense training ground to strengthen it. Oh, absolutely. He calls it an odd, herky-jerky childhood, which I think is the perfect description. It all started when his father just walked out on the family. King was only 2 years old.
And that instability, that seems to be the defining feature of those early years.
It is. He was raised by his single mother, Nellie Ruth Pillsbury King, and they were always moving. Durham, Maine, then West Appear, Wisconsin, back to Connecticut. It wasn't, a quiet, stable kind of poverty. It was constant upheaval.
She was really thrown in at the deep end, wasn't she? The material describes her as an early liberated woman, but not by choice.
Not by choice at all. She was constantly hustling to keep them afloat. I mean, some of the jobs were just brutal. Pressing sheets in an industrial laundry where the temperature could get over 110 degrees.
Wow.
And that lived reality of struggle, of always having to adapt, it gave him this immediate, unfiltered lens on the world. He learned very quickly that life is not fair. It's often harsh. And, that perspective is just foundational if you want to write effective horror or even just grounded human drama.
And what really seems to have cemented that raw, almost survivalist perspective, the kind that lets a writer look right at the grotesque without flinching, seems to come from these few really intense, almost bizarre early memories.
We have to start with the babysitter.
Eula Beulah.
Eula Beulah. The name itself sounds like it's straight out of one of his novels. She was this large teenager, and King remembers her as having this dangerous, volatile sense of humor.
The anecdote is just shocking.
It is. When little Stevie got sick, she literally threw him on the couch, sat on his face, dropped her wool-skirted butt right on him, and yelled, "Pow!"
Good heavens. That's just intensely traumatizing for a little kid.
It is. And then, of course, he vomited on the floor in distress, and she shoves him in a closet as punishment. It's this moment of, physical absurdity mixed with real cruelty.
But here's the thing, and this is where the real insight is. It's the intellectual move he makes later, looking back on that trauma.
Right. How does he connect that to literary critique? It seems like such a leap.
Well, he uses it as the ultimate benchmark for resilience. He says Eula Beulah basically prepared him for literary criticism.
I love this part.
He sums it up by saying, after having a 200-pound babysitter fart on your face and yell "pow," the village voice holds few terrors.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is just, it's an intensely dark memory, but the way he synthesizes it is genius. It suggests that being exposed to that kind of absurd cruelty early on built a kind of armor.
Exactly. It taught him how to take a shock and process it, and to realize that, external judgment, no matter how harsh it seems, is rarely as immediate or as psychologically terrifying as that childhood moment.
It built an immunity.
Yeah.
He learned that the world of high-minded critics is often just, intellectual flatulence. It's noise and posturing, but it rarely has the visceral impact of real, unvarnished trauma.
And it wasn't just physical absurdity that stuck with him either. There's that chilling matter-of-fact memory his mother shared with him.
About the suicide jumper.
Yeah, off the Graymore Hotel in Portland, Maine.
And his mother just recounts it later. She was in the sailor splattered. But the detail that lodged in King's mind, the specific visceral thing, was that the fluid that came out of the sailor was green.
Not red, green. That specificity is just terrifyingly effective.
It is.
Yeah.
And the power of it is not just the event itself, but his mother's completely matter-of-fact tone. She just said, "I have never forgotten it," and King concludes, "That makes two of us, Mom."
These are the origins of that unfiltered vernacular, that commitment to observational honesty that you see in all his fiction. It shows him the power of one single, unexpected, grotesque detail.
We also see this authenticity being forged not just through poverty or strange caregivers, but through really debilitating childhood illness. He missed most of first grade.
Right. Measles, something called strep throat, and these recurring, agonizing ear infections.
And the experiences with the ear specialist, the audiologist, those were moments of just absolute terror for a 6-year-old. The doctor had to repeatedly and traumatically lance his eardrum.
And every single time, the doctor would say the same thing, the same soul-crushing lie. "Relax, Stevie, this won't hurt a bit."
And the pain was so intense, the source material says the only thing that ever compared to it was the first month of recovery after he was hit by that van decades later.
He describes the sound inside his head as a loud kissing sound, like giants kissing. The auditory horror is just as visceral as the physical pain.
And that experience, the extreme pain, but also, crucially, the doctor's casual betrayal, it leads directly to this core principle for his whole life.
Fool me once.
Exactly. After being fooled 3 times, he adopts it as a lifelong rule. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Fool me 3 times, shame on both of us.
So that experience of betrayal and pain seems to have instilled this immediate distrust of sugarcoating, of the easy lie, which is precisely what he rails against in what he calls bullshit writing.
It is. It's the writer's promise to tell the truth, even if the truth hurts.
Yeah.
But he did learn to recalibrate that fear. He contrasts the terror of the ear doctor with his tonsillectomy later.
Right. He was told he could have all the ice cream he wanted.
He didn't even want any, but the relief from the threat of the needle in his ear was so immense, he just thought anything would have been better than the old needle in the ear trick. He was learning how to categorize pain and fear.
And that year, the year he spent mostly in bed, that was the accidental crucible of his writing career, wasn't it?
It really was. It was a time filler that turned into a destiny. Since he couldn't be outside running around, he just read. He says he read approximately 6 tons of comic books.
Everything from Combat Casey to Captain Marvel, and then he moved on to adventure stories like Tom Swift.
He just needed that mental stimulation because his body was failing him. And the birth of the writer, it wasn't immediate creation. It was structured imitation.
He started by just copying those Combat Casey comics word for word, right? Only adding his own descriptions.
Yeah, which shows that mastery always begins with immersion and repetition. It also highlights those early, clumsy attempts at being original.
The vocabulary confusion is great. Thinking dratty was a word instead of drafty, or that details were dentals.
Or that bitch just meant a very tall woman. You can see he's learning language primarily through reading, not hearing it.
But the real validation, the thing that made it real, came with that first sale.
His first original story. It was about 4 magic animals led by a character named Mr. Rabbit Trick. His mother read it. She laughed in the right places, which he notes is the first job of the ideal reader. And then she asked if he copied it.
When he said it was his, she gave him a quarter apiece for 4 stories.
The first buck I made in this business, as
Yeah.
he says. And that small transaction was so important. It wasn't about the money.
No, it was the validation.
Immense validation. His single mother was struggling so much, yet she spent that precious money to encourage him. It was a tangible investment. It created this crucial psychological link between his creativity and real-world value. A dollar earned.
So we move from those childhood snapshots into his restless teenage years. And it's this combination of ambition, a bit of scientific curiosity, and just utter chaos.
We have to talk about the super-duper electromagnet. This experiment he did with his older brother, Dave.
Dave is such a key character here. He has this massive IQ in the 150s or 160s, but he's driven by this almost reckless ambition.
And the electromagnet project, I mean, this was not some little science fair thing to pick up paper clips. Dave wanted to build something powerful enough to pick up Buicks, railroad boxcars, possibly army transport planes.
And the key ingredient for the chaos was Dave's impatience. They weren't going to use some little dry cell battery. No, Dave wanted wall current.
He cuts the cord off an old lamp, strips the wire, wraps it around a spike, and convinces young Stevie to plug it in. And that energy, that disaster, it's just this perfect illustration of King's early restless drive.
The result was, predictably, chaos. It blew out every light, not just in their apartment, but in the whole building and the one next door. They blew up a transformer outside.
It's a great metaphor, isn't it? The ambition was explosive and totally uncontrolled, but the sheer force of the attempt was immense.
And that same creative chaos, also driven by Dave's impatience, led to their first real publishing venture, Dave's Rag.
Right, a bi-weekly operation run out of their spider-infested basement. It was part family newsletter, part town paper, and part home for King's serial fiction. It was crucial early training in just producing work on a deadline.
And circulation grew, from 5 copies for family to 50 or 60 eagerly awaited copies around town. They started with the slow, messy, purple-inked hectograph,
Which he says was prone to developing weird, spore-like growths in the damp basement.
and they eventually upgraded to a faster but still incredibly messy drum printing press.
That upgrade is important because it shows Dave's guiding impatience, his hatred of being halted. What took a week on the hectograph took 2 nights of intense, messy labor on the press. It taught him the discipline of high-volume output.
That drive for production leads right into his first big commercial ambition. He decides to novelize the movie The Pit and the Pendulum.
After seeing it at the Ritz Theater, which he had to hitchhike 14 miles every weekend just to get to.
And he composed the novel directly onto these stencils, single-spaced, to save money. 19 cents a stencil.
He printed about 40 copies, called it VIB book, very important book, and sold them for $0.25 each at school.
And it was a huge, immediate hit. By lunch, he'd sold 3 dozen copies. He had $9 and change weighing down his book bag.
But that initial success was followed immediately by this professional humiliation.
His 8th grade teacher, Miss Hissler, saw what he was doing. She called it junk. She rolled up a copy, brandished it at him, and demanded to know why he would waste your abilities.
He had to refund everyone's money. He said he spent years after that feeling deeply ashamed of what he wrote. It was his first real taste of that high-minded criticism from an authority figure.
The path to becoming a writer is just paved with rejection, isn't it? And King decided to formalize this process. He internalized failure by pounding a nail into his wall.
Later, a spike.
Right, a spike, to impale every rejection slip he received.
That image is so profound. By the time he was 14, the nail couldn't support the sheer weight of all the paper. It's this perfect visual of the relentless volume of work and failure required to just keep going.
But the turning point didn't come from a big acceptance. It came from this tiny, handwritten note tucked inside a rejection slip.
From Algis Budrys, the editor of Fantasy and Science Fiction.
And the note just said, "This is good. Not for us, but good. You have talent. Submit again."
And that wasn't just encouragement. It was professional validation from a gatekeeper. Those few words, scribbled by a fountain pen, he said they brightened his entire dismal winter. It was just the dose of belief he needed to keep producing.
Which brings us to another pivotal moment, another clash with authority, the village vomit incident, which finally led to his first real practical lesson in editing.
Right. He was editor of the high school paper, The Drum, got bored, and decided to create this satiric underground paper called The Village Vomit.
With the motto, all the shit that will stick.
He went after the faculty with these harsh nicknames. Miss Ray Patch became Miss Rat Pack, the English teacher was Cowman, and the shorthand teacher, Miss Margerton, was called Maggot.
The jokes were, pretty juvenile. Pigs' eyeballs and farting contests, but the intent was sharp and malicious.
And the consequences were severe. Miss Margerton, this formidable teacher, she was deeply hurt and wanted him suspended. He ended up with a formal apology and 2 weeks of detention.
She was kind of the embodiment of severe, unforgiving judgment, wasn't she? The kind of critic who judges the person, not just the product.
But the school guidance counselor saw the restless energy behind the village vomit and steered him toward a job as a sports reporter for the Lisbon Weekly Enterprise, edited by John Gold.
And this is it. This is where the life-changing lesson happens in literally 10 minutes.
King turns in his first article, and Gould, without any ceremony, just takes a big black pen to it. He ruthlessly crossed out what King called the bad parts, showing him exactly what didn't belong.
King says he learned more in those 10 minutes than in all his English classes combined. It was a revelation, A lesson in discipline and focus.
And Gould's core tenets for writing are really foundational to King's entire craft.
Lay them out for us, because they really draw the line between the creative act and the professional requirement.
Okay, first,
Yeah.
when you write a story, you're telling yourself the story.
Yeah.
That's the discovery part, the fun
That's
part.
my favorite part.
Exactly. Second, when you rewrite, your main job is taking out all the things that are not the story. This is the discipline, the ruthlessness.
So going back to that article, King probably had all this flowery language about the gym or too much backstory. Gould just stripped it all away.
Precisely. He was getting rid of the writer's ego and all the unnecessary decoration. And that leads to the third tenet, the door closed, door open philosophy.
The first draft is for you, door closed. The rewrite is for the world, door open.
Right. The door closed draft is that chaotic, ambitious, electromagnet explosion kind of writing. The door open draft is when the work goes out into the world, ready for John Gould's editorial blade, ready to be made better.
That distinction is just huge. The permission to be messy in the first draft, but the ironclad requirement to be ruthless in the second.
So King believes that if you want to write well, you have to be ready to work your ass off. And that means carrying your tools with you everywhere. He sets up his whole philosophy using this metaphor of his Uncle Orrin's toolbox.
Which was just legendary for its weight alone. He describes it as this dark wooden box, brass latches, looking like a giant's lunchbox, and it weighed between 80 and 120 pounds.
And King asked him, why lug that whole thing just to fix a screen door? And Orrin's reply became a writing maxim for him.
It's best to have your tools with you. If you don't, you're apt to find something you didn't expect and get discouraged.
Which is the perfect analogy for writing, isn't it? If you hit a tough scene and you don't have the skills, grammar, vocabulary, concision, you'll just get discouraged and give up.
So let's look inside the toolbox. Top shelf, vocabulary, the bread of writing.
And the key advice here is so simple. Don't try to make your vocabulary bigger for show. Focus on how you use the words you already have. He quotes that great line, "It ain't how much you got, honey, it's how you use it."
And the cardinal sin is affectation. Don't dress up the vocabulary. He compares it to dressing a pet in evening clothes. The pet is embarrassed, and the owner should be too.
The reader just senses it immediately when you're straining to sound smart. And this leads to this really brutal honesty about word choice.
Always use the simplest, most direct word. He gives these great examples. Never use emolument when you just mean tip.
That kind of word choice is just designed to puff up the writer's ego. And he goes further. He says never write that a character performed an act of excretion when you mean take a shit.
Why is he so insistent on using language that some people might find crude?
Because the goal is plain, direct language that doesn't shy away from the truth just to be polite. If a character says take a shit, the writer's job is to report that honestly. Any attempt to sanitize it breaks that contract of telepathy. It reduces the clarity.
But he does acknowledge the skill it takes to handle street vocabulary well. He points to authors like Tom Wolfe and Elmore Leonard who could just perfectly translate the sound of real speech onto the page.
And that takes an observational ear. The same kind of unfiltered observation that saw the green fluid from the sailor. It's not about being clever. It's about being honest to how people actually talk.
Okay, moving down to the second layer of the toolbox, grammar and sentences. And here he says the indispensable guide is The Elements of Style by Strunk and White.
This is the writer's Bible for him. And their most important rule is Rule 17. Omit needless words.
And he takes that principle and applies it ruthlessly to two of the biggest grammatical sins, the passive voice and adverbs.
The passive voice, he says, is weak, fear-driven writing. It's writing that avoids taking responsibility. Strunk and White had this great metaphor.
The reader is floundering in a swamp.
Right, and the writer's job is to drain this swamp quickly or throw him a rope. The writer should throw the rope, not the rope was thrown by the writer.
So to make that really concrete for you listening, instead of saying, the house was slowly burned by the man, you have to write, the man slowly burned the house.
Absolutely. The active voice is strong, direct, and it tells you who is doing the action. King thinks fear is the root of about half the passive constructions he sees. The writer is just afraid of being too direct.
And the other great grammatical sin he warns against is the adverb, especially in dialogue attribution.
He is a huge advocate for the simple, almost invisible, said, he said, she said. He says writers shoot their attribution verbs full of steroids when they use adverbs or substitute verbs like he grated or she jerked out.
Why are adverbs so poisonous, especially with dialogue?
Because the writer is afraid the reader won't get how the character said it. But if the story is told well, if the characters in the scene are established, the reader already knows the tone.
Right. If a character says, I hate you, you don't need to add, she said angrily.
The reader's already there. Adverbs are a signal that you don't trust your reader, or you don't trust the descriptive power of your own scene.
He holds up Larry McMurtry as the master of this, someone who has allowed few adverbial dandelions to grow on his lawn. The moment you use gasped or hissed, you're just drawing unnecessary attention to the mechanics.
And the goal is telepathy, right?
Yeah.
You want the mechanics to disappear so the reader's just in the story. Adverbs and passive voice are like static on the line.
What's really fascinating is how he takes this down to the paragraph level. He argues the paragraph, not the sentence, is the basic unit of writing.
That's where coherence begins, and words stand a chance of becoming more than mere words. It's all about rhythm and pace.
You can tell instantly if a book will be easy or hard just by looking at the page, can't you?
He has that great analogy about easy books being like Dairy Queen ice cream cones, lots of short, airy paragraphs. Hard books are packed and dense. For fiction, the paragraph is the beat instead of the actual melody, controlling how fast the reader digests everything.
So for the first draft, the structure is intuitive, but in revision, you use the toolbox to fix it to make sure the rhythm is right.
That's the professional discipline. The paragraph is an instrument you learn to play through practice.
Okay, so now we move from the mechanical tools to the core philosophy, the big why of writing. And he starts with this extraordinary, almost mystical claim.
That writing is the purest form of telepathy.
Explain that. What does he mean by telepathy?
For him, it's the meeting of minds between the writer who is transmitting and the reader who is receiving across any distance and any amount of time. And he offers this little thought experiment to prove that it works.
Right. He asks you to close your eyes and visualize something very specific. A heavy, round table covered with a red cloth. On the table, a cage. In the cage, a white rabbit with the numeral 8 marked clearly on its back in blue ink.
And the miracle is, even if you and I argue about the exact shade of red or the size of the cage, we all get the same essential image. The table, the red cloth, the rabbit, and especially that number 8 in blue ink.
The writer transmitted it and the reader received it.
So if the medium works, then any failure of communication is almost always on the sender's side. On the writer's side, if you want to be an effective telepath, you have to transmit clearly.
Which leads right to his great commandment for how to strengthen that channel.
If you want to be a writer, you must do 2 things above all others. Read a lot and write a lot. There are no shortcuts, only consistency and hard work.
King is famous for being a prolific reader, something like 70 or 80 books a year. But he says it's not just about reading the greats. He thinks it's essential to read the mediocre and even the outright bad stuff.
This is such a great point that most writing advice misses. Reading a book that fails, like Asteroid Miners or Valley of the Gulls, can teach you what not to do. He says one truly bad book is worth a semester at a good writing school.
Why is reading a bad book so instructional?
Because you can see the mistakes so clearly. The bad dialogue, the structural problems, and crucially, it gives you this psychological fuel. It makes you think, hey, I could do better than this. I know how to avoid those errors.
And the writing part has to be consistent. His schedule is ironclad, 1,000 words a day, no matter what.
Consistency is everything. Because for him, the creative engine runs on discovery, and that fades fast. If he doesn't write every day, the characters begin to stale off in my mind.
They start to seem like characters instead of real people.
Right. And the work starts to feel like forced labor, which he says is the smooch of death for most writers. Daily effort keeps the momentum high.
So once you're ready to transmit, what do you write about? He argues against rigid outlines or the tyranny of plot. He prefers to start with the situation, the fossil.
He relies entirely on intuition. He sees himself as the story's first reader. He just puts characters in a predicament and watches what happens. For him, plot is shifty. It's this burdensome thing you impose out of fear. But the story, the truth of how characters react, is honorable and trustworthy.
And we see this situation-driven approach in the origins of his most famous books. They all come from a simple what-if question.
Right. Salem's Lot started with, what if vampires invaded a small New England village? Cujo. What if a young mother and her son get trapped in their car by a rabid dog?
They're just predicaments. The plot emerges from the characters trying to survive those situations.
Misery might be the perfect example. It came from this terrifying dream he had in London about a writer being held captive by a psychotic fan. But importantly, his original plan for the ending.
Where the writer's skin is used as the book cover?
He abandoned it. He ditched that incredible grotesque ending.
Why? If he had it planned, why change it?
Because the characters, especially Annie Wilkes, took over and dictated their own believable path. The writer's job is to tell the truth about what the characters are doing, even if it contradicts the plan.
The truth of character. They have to behave in ways that seem reasonable, even if they're monsters.
Plot is always secondary to character honesty, which is also vital in how characters speak. This brings us back to the toolbox principle. Never tell us a thing if you can show us instead.
A character's poverty is shown more vividly by their speech, what you reckon, or dunno, than by you just narrating that they're poor.
And this brings us back to the tough conversation about profanity. King doesn't endorse it personally. He agrees with his mother that it's the language of the ignorant.
No.
But it has to be used if it's honest to the character. If a character is working class and angry, they say, "oh shit," when they bang their thumb, not "oh sugar." Cowardly writing that sanitizes dialogue breaks the contract with the reader. It sacrifices truth for comfort.
He contrasts two genre giants to make this point, H.P. Lovecraft and Elmore Leonard.
Lovecraft's dialogue, he says, is often stilted and lifeless. It's full of formal, purple prose, even when characters are supposed to be terrified. Lovecraft was a loner, and he often failed at dialogue because he just wasn't good at listening to how real people talk.
But Elmore Leonard.
He nails it. The rhythms, the accents, the slang. He creates this realistic street poetry. Leonard clearly had that observational skill.
So dialogue is the purest index of character. It has to ring true. He says that in America today, writing fiction is no job for intellectual cowards. You have to transcribe the world as it sounds, not as you wish it sounded. So once that honest, character-driven first draft is done, the one you wrote with the door closed, the real disciplined work of revision begins. King's routine is simple. 2 drafts and a polish.
And the key to that first draft, as we said, is speed and concentration. You write it fast, focusing only on the story, on discovery. You get it down on paper, while the shape of the fossil is still bright and clear in your mind.
And then comes this crucial period before you open the door, the 6-week layoff. You have to put the manuscript completely aside.
That emotional distance is absolutely essential. It lets you come back and read it as if it were written by a soul twin.
So you can be objective.
Right. It makes it always easier to kill someone else's darlings than it is to kill your own.
Right.
If you jump right back in, you'll just defend every single word.
So after 6 weeks, the door opens for the second draft, and you welcome in the ideal reader. For King, that's his wife, Tabitha.
He believes every novelist has a single ideal reader. He writes for Tabby. He wants to impress her. He imagines her reaction. But she isn't just a cheerleader. She is unflinching when she sees something wrong, and her feedback forces him to be better.
We need to see that in action. How did her critique actually change a story?
Okay, a great example is from his novel Bag of Bones. The main character, Mike Noonan, is struggling with grief and writer's block. And King, wanting to show this, included 2 or 3 pages detailing Mike's really tedious community service work, mowing lawns, attending meetings.
And what did Tabitha say?
Her response was brutal but necessary. She just told him the hard truth. Who cares? You don't have to bore me with it, do you?
Wow.
And King knew she was right. That whole section went from 2 pages down to 2 concise paragraphs. The lesson is, if your ideal reader, the one person you trust, is bored, you have a problem.
And beyond the ideal reader, the technical foundation of the second draft is the 10% formula. He got this advice on a rejection slip early on.
Second draft equals first draft 10%.
It's a practical, quantifiable rule for being concise. It's Rule 17 made real.
King believes his later success came from religiously applying this formula to remove the puffiness, all the extra words that weaken the impact. It forces you to find the essential verb and the essential noun.
The second draft is also when you step back from the trees of daily writing to see the forest, the theme, the symbolism.
He often discovers the theme during the process, not before. He found this out the hard way writing The Stand. He got really stuck. He had his good guys gathering in Boulder, Colorado.
But he realized they were just recreating the same destructive society that had collapsed, the electronic golden calf.
Exactly. The narrative felt hollow because the good guys hadn't learned anything. So he solved this thematic problem by introducing violence, a brutal external force that wiped out a huge chunk of his main characters.
And that clarified the theme.
It made the theme clear that violence is not an external threat. It's woven through human nature like a damning red thread. He used the second draft to bring that dark conclusion out.
He even points to intentional symbols, like giving John Coffey in the Green Mile the initials JC.
After the most famous innocent man, right. It was deliberate. And he mentions it because critics often miss the obvious point while looking for some hidden meaning. He asks, what is this rocket science? Sometimes the symbols are right there on the surface.
And this is where the curriculum vitae turns from professional development to just personal survival. We have to talk about his long, dark struggle with addiction.
He applied those dark experiences directly to his fiction, sometimes without even realizing it. He was a functional addict, publishing bestsellers, but he was trapped.
He says he realized he was an alcoholic way back in 1975 when he wrote the Shining novel about an alcoholic writer who becomes violent. And he didn't consciously see he was writing about himself until years later.
And by the mid-'80s, he had added cocaine. He was working on novels like Misery and The Tommyknockers while his health was just falling apart.
The details from that period are incredible. He describes working on The Tommyknockers with his heart racing at 130 beats a minute from the coke, using cotton swabs up his nose to stop the bleeding.
He saw the novel's alien infestation as a direct metaphor for his addiction.
Yeah.
This thing that gives you energy and superficial intelligence, but it takes your soul. He was trading his life for the work.
And it all came to a head when Tabitha organized an intervention. And this was not some gentle conversation.
No. She got his family and friends together and dumped a trash bag full of evidence on the rug in front of him. Beer cans, Valium, cocaine, and multiple bottles of Scope mouthwash.
Scope. Why the mouthwash?
Because he'd discovered Scope was tastier than Listerine, and he was drinking it for the alcohol content. That trash bag was just this physical indictment of his life. It was the grotesque truth, right there on the floor.
And he says he quit not because of the drugs, but because he was tired of being Annie Wilkes' pet writer. He was held captive by his own dependency.
He was terrified he wouldn't be able to work sober. He'd convinced himself that drugs and alcohol were the source of his creativity, but he decided he would trade writing for his family if he had to.
And thankfully, the work came back.
Still all whole, he says. Sobriety was the ultimate test.
Which brings us to the second major life-changing trauma that almost ended his career, the 1999 accident.
He was taking his daily walk on Route 5 in western Maine when he was struck by a blue Dodge van. The driver, Brian Smith, was distracted by his Rottweiler, Bullet, who was trying to get into a cooler of meat.
The impact was catastrophic. His right leg was broken in 5 or 6 places, shattered hip, collapsed lung.
And the pain was so intense, he immediately compared it to that childhood eardrum lancing. The van was longer, but the lancing was still the more intense, shocking trauma.
And the driver, Brian Smith, he just sits on a rock and cheerily, detachedly estimates the brakes. It's broken in 5, I'd say maybe 6 places.
It's chilling. King realized he had nearly been killed by a character right out of one of my own novels.
His book, On Writing, was stalled for 18 months. He was in so much physical pain, he thought his career might be over.
But Tabitha, his wife, she understood something essential about him. Sometimes it's the work that bails me out. She encouraged him to finish it, to use the work as a way back to life, even if he was in agony.
And this all culminates in this final, powerful symbol, the desk. He contrasts the old, massive T-Rex desk where he wrote Drunken High with the new, smaller one.
The old desk represented ego, excess, addiction, the writer at the center of the universe. The new desk, he put it in the corner under the eave, kind of like his small childhood bedroom. It's a symbol of humility and focus.
And what's the final principle he offers from that lesson?
He says, put your desk in the corner, and every time you sit down there to write, remind yourself why it isn't in the middle of the room. Life isn't a support system for art. It's the other way around. The writing exists to make life better, not the other way around. So if we synthesize this whole curriculum vitae, the message isn't about some effortless genius. It's about a hard duality, a fusion of two conflicting forces.
On one side, you have that raw, personal honesty forged by trauma. The sailor's green splatter, the oteologist's lie that taught him to look at the world without flinching. That's the source of the story, the fossil.
And on the other side, you have the ruthless simplicity of the toolbox. Grammar, vocabulary, the active voice killing the adverbs, and that constant demand to omit needless words. It's a fusion of messy observation and meticulous communication.
It's about persistence, right? Impaling rejection, slips on a spike, accepting failure. And the profound importance of that ideal reader like Tabitha, who tells you the hard truth so you can use the 10% formula.
And the foundation is just read a lot and write a lot. Consistently. Writing is telepathy, a meeting of minds. The writer has to be clear, and the story has to be rooted in an honest situation, not a rigid, fear-driven plot.
That distinction between story, which is the truth of character, and plot, the architecture you impose out of fear, that's the key takeaway, I think. His whole path was about letting go of fear. The fear of being a hack, of sobriety, of judgment from the maggot margitans of the world.
The best stories, he says, are often beautiful, large monsters that readers don't want to leave, showing that sometimes even a monster is no monster. So if the core of great writing is just the honest transcription of a discovered truth, what raw personal memory or observation, what untapped truth are you currently holding back, fearing the criticism of the judgment makers?
Perhaps it's time to find your desk in the corner, close the door, and start digging up that fossil.